This is Gemara and Yoma Daf Samach Gimel. All the learning should be a schos for Shleimah for men ben Vega Chaim Mesar Shalom Asiv and Isa Idel Sar Baskanandel Itabasim as Chaisa Yisol Memindel. Ali has a person to Shavlei Shalom as Naomi Bashafigo Shirachana Fuchmo Ben Tilo Nim and Khan Rezel Melchai Basmina Liberacha Basava Musa Din Edel Bashina Mindel Sviv and Figure Tor Michel Sibir and Sela Huva Rivka Bas Bashavan Israel Sviv and Michel Esther Basoy Sharchli Israel as well as schos Shirach for Atalea Bas Ita. We pick it up 6 lines into the wide lines at Samach Beis and Beis, continuing the discussion of the Shnei Seirim, the 2 goats. We know we're sitting on Yom Kippurim. We have these 2 goats. We have a geirel that was done, a special box, a special lottery. One became Kodesh LaHashem, one became Kodesh LaAzazel. The Kodesh LaHashem we already dealt with extensively. You're going to shecht it, you're going to sprinkle it lefnai v'lefnim, you're going to sprinkle it on the pareiches, and then you're going to take it and mix it and put the blood in the mizbeach. The one that is Asir LaAzazel, we already mentioned the halachas we're going to deal more with now. They're going to take that animal, you're going to throw it off a cliff, as we'll see at the end of today. But said the Mishnah so far that these 2 animals have to be identical in height, in stature, in looks, height, stature, looks, 2 of those were the same, and as well in value. They also have to be purchased on the same day. Now we're going to learn a bit of a tangential halacha. What is the status if you shechted these karbanos for a different, inappropriate purpose, we could call it? You shechted it bachotz. The unique halachas of shchutei chotz, when you shech something chotz la'azara outside of the Beis HaMikdash, which you're not allowed to do. Says the Gemara, Tanu Rabbanan, 5 lines into the white lines, Shnei Sirei Yom Kippurim, we have these 2 goats, and what did you go? You went and shachtan bachutz, you shechta them outside. We'll just see a few Rashis to lay the framework over here. Rashi points out, Shnei Sirei Yom Kippurim, directly across in the Rashi, the reason why they have a status even before, as the Gemara is about to say, even before you do the gairel. Before you do the gairel, what are these 2 animals? There's 2 regular goats. So why are they special? Why do they already have kedusha? So Rashi points out, because when you purchase them, you did it with the money from the Trumas Halishka. They're used temple funds, the Beis HaMikdash money for the purchase, and therefore they already have sanctity. So if you go and you take those 2 animals and you shech them chutz, and Rashi points out, but chutz la'azara, you shech them chutz la'azara before the gairel. What is the halacha? Says the Gemara, chayiv. You're chayiv what? You're chayiv al shneim, on both of them. You're chayiv karis. The unique halacha which we'll learn in the Makar number B's, that Rashi already points out over here, that it has to be something which is ra'i lebezach oil mayid, as we learn from the pasuk in Vayikra. The pasuk there concludes that when you have a carbon, which is ra'i for the oil mayid, and you go and you shech the bachut outside the azara, what is the halacha? You're a chayiv karis. It's true, if you did it b'shayit, you're also going to have to bring a carbon. But we are focusing and honing in on the severe penalty of karis that one would get for shechting a carbon that could have been brought oil mayid, shechting it bachutz, and outside you get karis. The unique halachas of shchutei chutz. So says the Brisa part number 1, the 2 goats, if you shech them before the gairel, you're chayiv karis on both of them. But says the Gemara, Misha Igro, once you did the gairel aleihem, chayiv al shal shem, upater al shal azazel. Then you're only going to be chayiv on the animal which is kodesh laHashem, the animal which is going to be brought into the Beis HaMikdash, because then it fulfills the condition of ra'oi la'yel mayid, because it's going to be brought inside. But the one which is la'azazel, the one which is going to be thrown off the cliff, that one seemingly is not ra'oi la'yel mayid. Therefore, for that one, even though you shechted, you didn't have era, you shechted it bachutz, but you will not get karis. Says the Gemara, explains, what's the reason? Says the Gemara, we know it has to be, Rashi told us, it also has to be fit for something. What is this carbon fit for? As you look at the first Rashi, in the first wide line, Rashi says, the mechasri kol maisa avodas hayoyim shal matan demei par v'seir v'chafinas hakatayris v'akta rasa aruyim likadin musafin. Says the Gemara, you didn't do anything yet. So what is this carbon fit for? Amar Rav Chisda, you know what it's fit for? This carbon is fit for the seir. It could have been brought, as Rashi says. Excuse me, I read that Rashi wrong. That Rashi is going a little bit later. Excuse me. Now, pardon. The Rashi in the first white line, let's actually get rid of that highlight, because that, well, we should read in a moment. We jumped the gun a bit. The Gemara's question of Lamai Chazu, The Gemara is just simply asking that you didn't do the lottery yet, so what can you use this carbon for? You didn't do anything yet. So says the Gemara, Rav Chisda answers, it's roli l's'ira nase bachotz. So that is the Rashi. Rashi at the end of the narrow lines, Rashi points out, kol echad hayu roli l'akrive l'chatas ha-musav shel Yom HaKippurim. There's a musav on Yom Kippur. The musav on Yom Kippur is a seir, is a goat. So these goats which are sitting here, even before the lottery, were theoretically fit for the carbon musaf. So if you go and you take that goat and you shecht it outside chutz la'azara, you get that terrible punishment of Echiyev Misa. Says the Gemara, 1 second. Umayshna l's'ira nase bifnim. We said, when you have this ear, which is going to go Kodesh Lashem, Deloi, what's the reason why? This ear that's Nasal Hashem is not Roi. Why? D'mechuser hagrola. Because you didn't do the Gairel yet. This ear anase bachutz. But this ear that's going bachutz, meaning the one that we just said now, this seir which we said you could use for the carbon musaf, nami loy chazu. It's also not fit for the carbon musaf. Basically, the Gemara is saying, let's go inside over here. Let's figure out what's going on. We're trying to explain that before you did the Gairel, you're chayiv karis for both of them. And the Gemara is bothered. Why you chayiv karis for both of them? So the Gemara says, you know why? Because it's fit for a carbon musaf. Says the Gemara, that's ridiculous. Because just like it's not really fit yet for a Kodesh Lashem, because you didn't do the Gairel yet, so too it's not fit for the carbon musaf. Why? The musaf comes after the whole Avaida, and you didn't do it. So there's a timeline issue. Says the Gemara, no problem. Kosavar Rav Chisda, ein mechuser zman l'baybayim. Mechuser zman, lacking in time, just letting the day play itself out, that is not a deficiency, that is not a problem, and therefore, even though it's true, you can't bring the carbon musaf right now, but still, if you go and you shech this carbon bachutz, that's enough of a psul, and you're going to be chayiv karis. Amar Ravina, says Ravina, 1 second. Hashtad Amar Rav Chisda, now the Rav Chisda taught us 3 lines from the bottom, Samach Beis of the base. Mechuser agrolik, mechuser ma'asadami, lacking in the Gairol is like lacking in action, and therefore before you do the Gairol, the one that could have been brought Sir Lashem, that's not called enough of a reason. Again, we're trying to figure out that the carbon needs to be Ra'li Layomayit. The carbon has to be Ra'li for a carbon, and then you went and you shechted about chutz, then you get this punishment. So we explained that the fact that the carbon is Ra'li to be brought as Sir Lashem, that's not enough. It's only because it's Ra'li for the carbon Musaf. So says Ravina, no, what do we see right now? Because the fact it's lacking in the Gairol, therefore that's called Mechuser Maisa. Whereas Rav Chisda explained, but lacking time is not enough. Hadam Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, says the Gemara, Shlamim sheshachta kodim sheniftachu dulas hazeichal psulim. If you have a carbon shlamim that you shechted before you open the doors of the heichal, it is puzzle. What's the reason? Remember the Torah teaches us v'shachar pesach al mayit bizman shu pasu avlo bizman shu nol, that you have to shecht only when the doors are open, not when the doors are closed. Moving over to Samach Gimel Amud Aleph, shachtan bachot. So what is the status? If you take a carbon shlamim and you shecht the bachot chutz la'azara kodim sheniftachu dulas. If you shecht it before you open the doors of the Eichel, potter, you're going to be potter. Like we just said, that it has to be shechted at a time that the doors are open. My taima mechuser psicha k'mechuser ma'asadami. So says Ravina, according to Rav Chisda, I can explain that din over there. You know why you're going to be potter? Because the lacking of the doors being open is like mechuser ma'isa. Just like Rav Chisda explained that we have the carbon which is Sir Lashem, and you're not chayiv karis on that carbon because you didn't do the garil yet, you didn't do the lottery, and the lack of lottery is mechuser ma'isa. It's not fit yet. And the aleph base of any time you have something called shchutei chutz, terrible avira, karis, is only if it's ra'yi layamayit, it's ra'yi lekarbon. And this, since it's mechuser ma'isa, it's not ra'yi for that. Why is it mechuser ma'isa? Why is it lacking in an action? Because you didn't do the lottery. Says Ravina, according to Rav Chisda, we can explain that so too over there. If the doors were not open, that's the reason why you're going to be potter, because the opening of the doors is also mechuser ma'isa. It is lacking in an action. Says the Gemara, 1 second. Does Rav Chisda subscribe to this whole rule of a hoyel because it's lacking in something? This will be reminiscent of our carbon, our Masechtas Pesachim days. if you have a carbon Pesach, which is shechted bachot. Again, another case. All today's all about shchutei chutz. You shechted it outside of the azara. Says the Gemara, what is the status? When did you do this? Bishar Yimais Hashana during the year. What's the halach? Lishmai. If you shechted it for a carbon Pesach, Potter. Shaloi lishmai. If you shechted it not for a carbon Pesach, what's the reason you shechted it for a carbon shlamim? Every time lishmai means Pesach, shaloi lishmai means shlamim. Chayiv. What is the reason why you are a chayiv? So let's look at Rashi. Rashi, in the second to last wide line, Rashi explains, Shaloi lishmai, in the last wide line, El l'shem shlam m'chayiv. Why? D'ra'oi hu l'shem shlam b'fnim. It's ra'oi to be a shlamim. Whereas if you shechted it as a carbon Pesach, is it a right to be a carbon Pesach? Absolutely not. We're sitting in the middle of Tammuz, in the middle of the summer. If I shecht an animal thinking carbon Pesach, that's ridiculous. We're in the middle of the summer. You can't bring a Pesach right now. And therefore, you're not going to be chayiv for karis. You're not going to be chayiv for shchutei chutz. Again, this unique halacha, the shchutei chutz is only if you have a carbon, which is ra'yu lo'el ma'id, which means that it has to be fit for a carbon. If I shechted for a das, a kavanah, a totally ridiculous thing, a carbon Pesach middle of the year, I'm not going to be chayiv for it. Whereas if I did it shaloi lishmai, the irony, I didn't do it for a carbon Pesach, I did it for a shlamim. It could be a shlamim today, and therefore I will yes be, God forbid, chayiv karis. Explains the Gemara. Time of the shaloi lishmai. So we see in this price, it's only because I did it with intent not to be a Pesach. I wanted to be a shlamim. Hastama. Let's say I didn't have any das, I just shechted it. Stama. What's halacha? Lishmayu. Stam is going to have the status of a carbon Pesach, upater, and you're not going to be chayiv karis. But I asked the Gemara, V'amai. Why don't we say, if Rav Chisda has this whole rule of hayil, that since, we're allowed to say since it could have been done something else, so why don't we say since if you brought it inside shaloi lishma, meaning for a shlamim, then it would have worked. So too now, if you did it for stam, which means for a carbon Pesach, you also should be chayiv karis. So in this case, you should also have a chayiv karis according to Rav Chisda if we subscribe to this rule of hayil. Says the Gemara, Hasam bayakira, Hailoi bayakira. You can't forget what was the case. It was an animal which is designated as a carbon Pesach. So if you want to take a carbon Pesach and bring it as a shlamim, you have to uproot it. You have to have das for it to be a shlamim, and that's why the stomach won't work. Whereas by us, you don't have to uproot it at all. The seer and Yom Kippur, you don't have to consciously uproot it because you could use it for a carbon musaf for the same type of carbon. Because it was the only reason why it had the Kedusha, like we said, was because it came from the Bedek Habayis, it came from the temple funds. That also always works for the Musaf. Therefore, that case will work. Says the Gemara, Rabba bar simi maslo b'derabba, v'kashle b'derabba. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Simi learned that which we just said a moment ago, the Stira and Rav Chisda. He learned the name of Rabba, v'kashle derabba, and he had a Stira and Rabba derabba, u'meshani k'dashaninan, and he answered just like we just said. Says the Gemara, okay, so we had a steer in Rav Chisda, we answered up the steer in Rav Chisda, we were bothered, does he hold to the rule of Hoyle? And we proved, yes, he does. It seemingly was a contradiction. No, there's a fundamental difference in that, the fact that a seir, which is purchased for the seir l'Hashem, seir l'Azazel, could quickly morph into a seir for the carbon musaf because it's bought for the same funds. Whereas when it came to the carbon Pesach, when I separated a carbon to be a carbon Pesach, I can't now go and just bring it as a stam shlamim. Says the Gemara, let's focus in the fact that it's Rav Dimi saying this halacha in the name of Rav Yirmi, in the name of Rav Yochanan, as we'll see in a few moments, where they can have another sheet in the name of Rav Yirmi, Rav Yochanan. Pesach sheshachtu b'chutz. The same case. You have a carbon Pesach that you shechted b'chutz out to the Azara. B'shari Moisei during the year. Says Rav Dimi, bein lishmai, bein shalei lishmai. Potter, there's no chiyav karis for that which you did. Amar Avdimi, what's the reason? Amrit l'shmai t'kamei Rav Yirmiyah. I said this did in front of Rav Yirmiyah again. A carbon Pesach on Tammuz in the middle of the summer that you shechted whether you had intent or not. I don't care. No chiyav karis. And we explains. B'shlama l'shmai. If I shechted to be a carbon Pesach, dalei chazulei. I understand why you're going to be potter because it can't be a Pesach in the middle of the summer. Elo shaloi l'shmai. Amaya chazish l'shmai b'fnim. But if you shechted shaloi lishmai, which we know means shlamim. Why is there not a kli of kares? There is a potential to bring this carbon as a shlamim today in the middle of the summer. Va'amar li, and Rav Yirmi explains, akiras chutz lav shmei akira. Again, the same fundamental din. It's a carbon pesach. You adas, you made it a pesach. The fact that you go and you shechted b'chutz la'azara and you shechted to be a shlamim, that does not uproot it, does not take off the label of carbon pesach, and that's the reason why you will not get this unique halacha of kares. Again, we're extending and learning more details in this halacha of shchutei chutz. We started off today, which we'll see in the makar in a few moments. Shchutei chutz is anytime you have a carbon which is raw, it's right for a carbon, and you go and you shecht it outside the azara, you get kares. Now we're learning, but if you have a carbon pesach which has a label of a carbon pesach, and you go and you shecht it outside, says Rav Dimi, no kares. Why not? It fulfills all the rules. You did it shlei lishma, you did it as a shlamim, and you could bring a shlamim inside. Explains Rav Dimi, because there's a shame pesach, and you did not uproot that shame pesach just by the mere fact that you shechted it outside of the azara. Ki also Ravin Amar Rav Yirmiyah. Ravin, again, like I pointed out, that was Rav Dimi. Now we have Ravin Amar Rav Yochanan pesach shechtu b'chutz. Same case b'shayim as Shana ben Shom ben Shmai. Chayiv. So Rav Dimi said Potter. Ravin says Chayiv. Va'afilu lishmai. Says the Gemara, really? Even if you shecht lishmai for a Pesach in the middle of the year, in the middle of the summer, I shecht my sheep for a carbon Pesach, and then I'm going to be chayiv for shchutei chutz v'atanan. But we learned mechuser zman, if it's lacking in the time, bein begufa, bein bebailim, whether it's lacking in the time for the animal itself or in the owner, ve'zeu mechuser zman bebailim. What does it mean? A case where it's lacking in the time of the owner? Explains the Gemara, Hazava yoledes, that if you have a carbon, that a zav, a male who has an emission, or a female, a yoledes is a woman that gives birth, a meseira, a person who's a meseira, shekrivu chatas, and they bring the carbon chatas v'hasham, or the carbon hasham, ba'chutz, they bring it and they shecht it again, ba'chutz, outside the azara, betur, and they are potter, oiloiseim ushlameim, that's when they came to their chatas and asham. When it comes to their oila and their shlamim, then ba'chutz are going to be chayiv. So we're seeing a difference between their carbon chatas and asham is pater, oila and shlamim is chayiv. It's only if you shecht for the right purpose. Aval shaloi lishmai chayiv, you're going to be chayiv. And the Gemara explains, lishmai, if you shecht it for its purpose, you shecht it as the carbon for the zav, mitzayir, etc. Mia pater. Says the Gemara, if you shecht it for its own purpose, what's the reason? Lishmai mia pater. We said that if you shecht it for its own purpose, then you're going to be pater. Amai, ask the Gemara, according to Ravin. Again, Ravin said in the name of Rav Yirmiyah and the name of Rav Yochanan that the carbon pesach, whether you did a lishma or lishma, you're going to be chayiv. So I asked the Gemara, I don't understand. And this whole brayisa, what's the reason? If you did a lishma, you're pater. Nema, you should say, you should say, since if it's shaloi lishmai, which means, of course, it means shlamim, so too, or in this case, actually it's going to mean when you shecht the asham shaloi lishmai, you could bring it in, therefore you should be chayiv. So ask the Gemara on Ravin, how are you telling me that you're always going to be chayiv? Seemingly in this braysa, the fact that it says pater shows us that there should be no chayiv in this case. Answers the Gemara, hacha hashta hasam boyakira hacha pesach b'shayim shlamim nenu. Again, a very similar teretz to that which we said before. Over there, it is an asham. So once it's an asham, you got to take it out of being an asham in order to get this chi of kares, and you didn't. Whereas by us, now this is like the flip side. Before we said you have a carbon pesach, and by shechting it out, so it doesn't remove the carbon pesach. Now we're saying a little bit differently. Anytime you have a pesach during the year, shaloi lishma, automatically has the status of a shlamim. If I look at my pesach, if I designate an animal today as a carbon pesach, in the middle of Tammuz, in the middle of the summer, you know what this animal is right now? It's a shlamim. It's true, in a few months' time, when Pesach comes, it's going to become a carbon pesach. But right now, inherently, it's a shlamim, says Ravin, and that is the reason why Ravin argues on Rav Dimi. And Ravin said over the name of Rav Yirmiyah Yochanan, a carbon pesach that was shechted b'chutz, whether lishma shalei lishmai, it's going to be chayiv kares for shchitas chutz. Says the Gemara, Rav Ashi Masni Chayiv Kedamarin. Rav Ashi learned Chayiv like the din of Ravin. Rav Yirmiyah Medifti Masni Potter. He learned like Rav Dimi Kosavar. And the Gemara explains, what did Rav Yirmiyah hold? Pesach B'Shayim Shana Boy Akira. Like we explained, the name of Rav Dimi has the name of a carbon Pesach, and you have to uproot that. Akira's Chotz Lav Shemei Akira. And however, explains the Gemara, this is Pligad Rav Chalkir Bar Tuvia. This in deference of Chalkir Bar Tuvia, who said that no, you could uproot it even when it's shechted ba chutz. And that is Machlokes Rav Dimi and Ravin with regard to a carbon Pesach that was shechted ba chutz, lishmai shaloi lishmai, whether it's going to be a chi of karis for shchitas chutz or not. Says the Gemara, let's go back to our original discussion of today, and this is now going to be a little bit wrapping things together. Like we started off and we pointed out that on the next Amid, we're going to have the Makar, the source, this whole Ach of Shchutei Chutz. Let's get to the Gemara right now. Amar, Mar, we are 6 lines from the bottom of Samach Gimel Amid Aleph. Mishehegrel Aleim Chayiv Al Shal Shem. Once you do the Gairel on these 2 Sirim, one La Hashem, one La Azazel, you're a Chayiv for the one which is La Hashem, and you are Pater Al Shal Azazel, the one which is going to be thrown of a cliff, that one you're a potter. Tanu Rabbana, we learned in a brisa. Let's explain where all this comes from. Ish mi beis Yisrael. It says the pasuk in Vayikra that each person in the house of Klal Yisrael should yishcha shor kesav hayis b'machane oi asher yishcha bichutz lemachane. If he shechted in the camp or outside the camp, vel pesach oyel moyed lo yiviu. He made a mistake. He did something wrong. He shechted it outside and he did not bring it to the oyel moyed. So we see it should have been something that's brought to oyel moyed, and instead he shechted it outside. Lahakriv carbon Hashem. He did not bring it as a carbon to Hashem, and the pasuk ends off that he's going to get karis. Moving over to Samach Gimel Amud Beis, explains the Gemara. Carbon. The pasuk says carbon. So if it would have just said the word carbon, shaymeani, I would have learned afilu kache bedikabayis shenikru carbon. I would have thought even kache bedikabayis, even a carbon which is bought with temple funds for the upkeep of the Beis Hamikdash, I would have thought that's also included in carbon. And also, if you shechta bachutz, you would also get kares. Shenikru carbon ke'inyan shenemer, like the pasuk says, v'nikra ves carbon Hashem. Talmud loymar. So on that, the pasuk speaks out explicitly, like we keep on pointing out. Vel pesach oyel moyed lo yeviu. And from there we learn out, and this is the absolute aleph base of all shchutei chutz. Kol haroi lepesach oyel moyed chayiv alav bachutz. Only an animal, a carbon which is roi and fit to be brought to the entrance of the moyed, that is when you have a chiyuv, there's an obligation, a punishment of kares if you shechta bachutz. However, kol shein roi lepesach oyel moyed ein chayavin aleh bachutz. Says the Gemara, Gevaldik, so we have a makar, the only time there's a chiyuv kares, shchutei chutz, the label, the headline of shchutei chutz is only something which is roi la'oyel moyed. Says the Gemara, what does this come to exclude? Oitzi elu she'ein ruyin lepesach oyel moyed. You know what it comes to exclude? It comes to exclude these karbanos which are not fit v'oyel moed, v'loy oitzi para zachatos. It does not exclude a para of a chatos, u'seir hamishtaleach, very important words, and it does not exclude the seir hamishtaleach shuroi lavui al pesach oyel moed, because these are roi, theoretically fit to come to the entrance of the oyel moed. That's what I would have thought, and if I would have thought that, we would have been messed up, because we just started a second ago. No, I'm sorry, it's very good, because the Siyar Mishtaleach is going to be excluded. Talmud loymar laHashem, mishem yuchadim laHashem. The animals which are designated for Hashem, those are the ones that are going to be over for shchutei chutz. Yatu elu she'ein yuchadim laShem, which are not excluded, which are not designated for Hashem. Says the Gemara, okay, so far we learned that the Siyar Mishtaleach is not excluded. Ula Hashem, the Torah says, Ula Hashem, who does that really come to exclude? You're telling me that comes to exclude that the Seir La'azazel is not included in the chiyuv of kares? How could that be? V'raminu, I'll ask you a stira. Yirot says in the pasuk, Yirot telekarbani shel Hashem. The pasuk says with regard to the bachar, the newborn animal, and on the 8th day, it should be Yirot said, should be acceptable as a carbon to Hashem. Elu ishim. From here we learn this is the fires of the mizbeach, that you're not allowed to bring a fire less than 8 days old. But how do we know that you should not as well take something and be makdish and be consecrated an animal when it is also mechusar zman? It's not at the right age. It's less than 8 days. Carbon. It says from here, carbon. La Hashem, and then it says La Hashem. Le Rabbi Seir HaMishtaleach. That comes to include a Seir HaMishtaleach, teaching us that a Seir HaMishtaleach cannot be designated if it's less than 8 days old. So the Gemara is saying, so what do we see? We see that La Hashem comes to include Le Rabbis. And you told me a second ago that the word La Hashem comes to exclude. Amar Rava, explains Rava, explains Rava, come on, don't get held up on the word. Look at the context. Contextually, one place La Hashem excludes, one place La Hashem includes. Some over there, Del Pesach Le Rabbis, Lashem lohoitzi. Hachadisha lohoitzi Lashem the rabbis. Very good, and we don't have any issues. So we learned our makar, and now we know that when we have the seir that is going to be la'achar hagrala after you did the gairul, only the one which is fit la Hashem, that one is going to be a din of shchutei chutz, because that one is rali lavudayel ma'id. Whereas the one which is going to go la azazel is not, because it says la Hashem, and therefore it's not included. Says the Gemara, Taima de Rabbi Rachmana. So what do we see? The only reason why you're not allowed to set an animal which is less than 8 days old is because we have a special reboy, a special pasuk come to teach us that. Holy Rabbi, if the Torah did not say anything, I would think you're even allowed to take an animal and use it and set it aside as a seir l'mishalech, a seir la'azazel, even if it's less than 8 days old, less than the appropriate time. Says Mari, we have a problem, a different rule. The rule is that the gairil doesn't work unless it's fit la Hashem. This is another one of the applications that we see that the two carbonos are tied hand in hand. That only if this carbon is fit la Hashem could this one go la Azazel, and this one can only go la Azazel if it could have theoretically been la Hashem, and only could have theoretically been la Hashem if it's 8 days old. So says the Gemara, why do you need a pasuk to teach me that only once it's 8 days old it could be la Azazel? It doesn't have. It's not true, because the mere fact that it has to also be theoretically possible to be la Hashem shows us that it has to be at least 8 days old. Amar Rav Yosef Hamani Chanana Mitzri, a different shita. The Tanya Chanana Mitzri Omer Afilu Dam because maybe Chaveru Mazig Loi. He argues on this whole premise. Chanana Mitzri holds that even if the blood for the Seir La Hashem is in a cup, and this Seir La'azazel dies, what are you allowed to do? You're allowed to, if you maybe Chaverai Umizave Gloi, you're allowed to bring the other goat from the marketplace and pair it with this one. He does not hold that there's as much as a unique tide. The two animals have to mamish go hand in hand. Explains the Gemara 1 second. He just said it's not pushed away. He didn't totally destroy the whole halacha of the Gairol, Dilma, Maisi, Umagril. Does the Kohen bring? Maybe the Kohen should bring 2 goats and Dilma, Maisi, Umagril and make a Gairol on them. And that's when it's going to work. So how do we see from Chanana Mitzri that he's disagreeing with the whole premise of this halacha? Elam Rav Yosef, so comes on Rav Yosef with a new answer. Hamani Rav Shimini, Detanya Meisacha Mehen. What is the story of one of the 2 goats die? Maybe Chaveira Shaloi Bagrol Div Rav Shimon. Rav Shimon holds straight up. The girl is not ma'akev. If one of them dies, you bring a new animal, and you do not need to do a girl. So according to Rav Shimon, we are going to need a special pasuk to teach me that this Seir La'azazel has to be at least 8 days old. And without that pasuk, we would not know it because Rav Shimon holds that the girl is not ma'akev. Ravina Amar, a secondary, it's going Shahumam, V'chiloy Alacher. A unique case, says Ravina. What happens if the animal gets a mum? What happens if the Seir La'azazel gets a mum? What do? You can't bring it with a mum. So what do? You machal, you transfer the Kedusha onto another animal, and then that animal is going to be allowed to go, and it's also not going to need a lottery. So we as well see a case in which we would need a special pasuk teaching me that if it's less than 8 days old, you're not allowed to make it a Seir La'azazel. Ask the Gemara, the possible emuma. Where do you see if it has a mum? It's possible. We know carbonais, but how do you know the animal that you're throwing off a cliff can't have a mum? The Tanya says in a braysa, v'isha loy titnu mehem. That the pasuk says you should not make a fire on any of them. Elu achalavim. This refers to the parts of the animal. How do we know that only all of them are aser? Tam leimar mehem. It says in the Torah. Tamalaymer Mehem, any of them. Mizbeach, what does the word Mizbeach mean? Zuzrikas damim Hashem. This refers to the zrika, the throwing of the blood to Hashem. The zrikas damim Hashem. The Rabbi Siyar Mishtaleach comes to include a Siyar Mishtaleach. That if it has a mum, it's not going to work. And the Gemara says, we need two different psukim to teach us. One, if the Siyar Lazazel is a Baal Mum, it does not work. And two, if it's less than 8 days old. Why? Because Rachman B'chusar Zman Mishabdol Mati Zmane. It's not the time yet. I would think maybe it's okay. Because Rachman B'Almum Mishon Demayis. That's why we need both psukim. There's a few lines left to the 2 dots, but Amir Tashem will pick up for there tomorrow. We'll do a quick recap.